Hey everyone, I'm Hayes, and this is the continuation of our prosthetics tutorial, using this quick Ghoul sculpt as an example. Please go check out the first part where we sculpted this and my other videos. Of course, if you find this useful, do like, comment, subscribe, and share it with anyone else you think would be interested. First off, to lower the barrier to entry on trying this yourself, all of this will also work just as well with one of these cheap polystyrene heads. If you don't have the ability to get a life cast of a real face, just be sure to get the over 17-inch circumference heads, as they're the closest to real life I've found. The eyes are pretty good, the nose is pretty good, but the bottom of the face is thinner than you want, so you have to build it out a bit when you're sculpting. I find them super cheap on eBay. When you do the mould making on a full head, you can brace the back of the head with a block of carved furniture foam for balance. As you can see, this one has had a lot of use. The sculpt has dried out a bit, and we've hit it with some varnish spray, which plasticizes the surface of the clay a little bit and should make it release from the mould a lot easier and protect it during this drying process. Now, here we have the exact same clay that we sculpted the original from. It's wet, water-based clay. Using its own weight on this cutting board, made from scrap wood, which it has a thick channel and a thin channel on either side, we use a wire cutting tool to cut lovely, even slices. Here, we're making a thick set of strips for the weight-bearing parts of the mould walls around the sculpt. I'm using a completely blunted knife for this, good enough to cut the clay, but not me. But you can use a sculpting tool or a palette knife, all the same. Just do the exact same thing with the thinner side to make less bulky strips of clay. Yes, this takes a lot of clay, especially compared to the sculpt. Before we put the clay walls on the face, I just spent a few minutes cleaning up the edge of the sculpt to make sure there is a nice clear gap between where the sculpt ends and where the walls will sit. This will make for a much nicer to use mould, as you know where the latex has to go, and have a bit of a lip so it doesn't go everywhere when slush casting. This is using one of our favourite spoon-like sculpting tools again. The trouble with this part is that it will reveal a little bit of plaster, and as a rule, like bonds to like. But we have a solution for this. Mould release wax! This is mostly used for fiberglass mould, but works for anything really. And don't make the same mistake I've made in the past, where you put mould release on before you put the walls, and then you can't get the clay to stick to the surface to make your walls. Here we have our big thick pieces of clay, leaving a solid centimetre or so between the wall and the sculpt. We want to make sure the smoothest side of the clay strips are facing upwards here. We literally just smush the parts of the wall down on the plaster. These thick pieces will be the basis of our entire wall structure to bear the weight of the plaster as we pour it on and hold the rest of the walls on. You can use your fingers to force all the edges down onto the plaster and be a bit more aggressive on the outside and neater on the inside. I even use some water and a brush to blend it in. Any extra pieces of clay we have or cut off to make it line up nicer, we can use as buttresses to support some more of the weight of the clay walls. With our big fat walls on, we can lay out some of the thinner ones. As before, smoothing it down, making sure it's all well connected with the plaster of the master and stuck to the other clay wall pieces, blending them in with our fingers. We're making sure to keep that nice distance from the main sculpt as well. Blending it all together makes a nice, neat mould, but we'll also make sure the walls are waterproof, so when you pour the liquid plaster in, it won't all escape and ruin your carpets. Just make sure it all lines up and is sealed, and you're using spare parts from the buttresses. Take your time with this. Do remember to look at the walls from other angles just to double check yourself. This is basically the structural walls done. Now we put down the secondary walls. These are the walls that allow us to fill the mould and don't have to worry about parts overflowing. Then with some more blobs of spare wall, we put some pry points in the bottom of the mould wall. These are like mould keys for a two-part mould, but are just there to create a gap between the finished mould and the plaster face. That gives us a little bit of leverage in case the mould has trouble coming off. Just make sure they don't touch the original sculpt. Now we spend a little time making sure we're happy with these walls. You only get one chance at this, so beware. It is possible to simply rush through your mould making and have a mould that is full of bubbles and cracks when you take it off the sculpt and just generally hates you, and still use it. It just means you need to put more work into fixing the mould afterwards, or fixing each and every casting from it. So it is possible to fail by accident and still have usable mould. It's very easy to skimp on the amount of time put into mould making, since you've just spent hours sculpting. I've learnt this the hard way. Here we return to the mould release. I don't think we need mould release for the actual sculpt itself, just where the plaster is exposed. So we're going to go over that with this wax. The tub came with a big round sponge, but it's been torn apart by previous moulds, so I use a mix of a sponge fragment and a brush to spread it. Make sure not to build up too much in any one area, as that'll create bubbles of wax in your finished mould. That's all we need with this set of equipment, as it's now time for plastering. I have a big bowl, a set of kitchen scales and a large tub of water, and of course, my giant bag of plaster. My plaster of choice is Herculite 2 plaster, as it turns out very strong, both capturing and keeping details of the final mould. As I understand it, you should always add plaster to your water. So I'm going to measure out the water first, roughly 200 to 240 grams of water with 500 grams of plaster to create a first layer of the mould. It wants to be a little more liquid than future layers to capture all of the small details, about the consistency of cream. Now we just scoop out 500 grams of plaster, sifting it onto the water in the bowl, all on the scales. Once it's all in there, we can start mixing it up. You can use a spoon for this, or just your hands to mush all the lumps out. There's no substitute for fingers here. It's pretty safe to use plaster with your hands, as long as you don't leave your hands in there as it's set, because it does heat up, and that's where it gets dangerous. Here I find I've made it a little too runny, so just add another handful of plaster to the mix. Mix it all together, and go again. Now we pour this over the sculpt. Making sure to capture all of the details. Run the liquid plaster over any bubbles that form, and just try to get the whole thing wet with plaster. Feel free to make sure it's all captured with your fingers, but be sure not to damage the sculpt or knock the walls down by accident. Because of the time we put into the walls, none of the plaster is leaking out. Now we just wait for this to set. The first layer has gone pretty well. So now we're going to do another layer with half the plaster we used before, just to reinforce where it's a little thin. Being a thicker plaster, I actually applied this mostly with my hands rather than pouring it out. We do want to keep the outside of it smooth, with few burrs or places where it can get air holes, as they will go towards weakening the mould. But don't worry, this isn't our last layer. We're just repeating basically as before. Right, whilst this layer is drying, we need to cut layers of Hessian and scrim. This is needed for the last stage. We're not going to use too much plaster for this third layer, another 250 gram layer. This last layer will be our super strong layer of plaster infused Hessian. This makes the mould a lot more survivable, because if I manage to crack the mould whilst removing it, or if in future whilst dropping it, it won't all come apart and can be repaired. We soak the strips in plaster, and you just want to build up a solid layer of the scrim over the whole mould, paying special attention to the very edges and over the high parts of the face. All of the fibres of the Hessian need to be impregnated in plaster, otherwise it can catch on things and form weak spots. And once it's all on, you can take any leftover plaster and use it, your hands and water to smooth down the surface and neaten everything up. And that is our finished mould. Now we just leave this thing to fully cure before we remove it from the sculpt and the plaster head. We'll go into that in the next video, along with taking our first casting. I should say that I have no formal training in doing any of this, and I think mould making is the worst of my skills. So all I've told you, take it with a pinch of salt. More of a launch platform and a demonstration of how easy it can be than a serious lesson. If I've done anything you think is wrong or goes against your experience, please let me know. I'm here to learn as much as I'm here to teach, and I'll love you for it. As always, thank you for joining me. If you found any of this useful or entertaining, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe to my channel, and if you have friends who are interested in trying anything like this, give it a share with them, or in any costume or cosplay communities you're part of. It'll help me more than I can say. Stay tuned for the channel for more of this tutorial and more of my work in the future. Thanks, see you soon.